All right, so if you've been in the React world for any amount of time, you know that hooks weren't just some new feature. They completely changed the game, right? So today, we're going to dig deep. We're not just going to look at the syntax. No, we're going way beyond that. We're going to get into the core mental models, the way you need to think to really get hooks. And we'll start right at the beginning. Why this massive change happened in the first place.
So here's the game plan. We'll kick things off with the big why, that whole shift from classes to functions. Then we're diving into the heavy hitters, useState, which I want you to think of as component memory, and of course, the one everyone struggles with, useEffect. After that, we'll quickly cover the rules that hold it all together, and then we'll wrap up by really locking in these new ways of thinking in React. All right, let's get right into it. The shift to hooks. You gotta wonder, right? Why did the entire React world just pivot so hard, so fast, away from class components? It wasn't just about making the code look a little prettier. Nope. It was about tackling some really deep, persistent headaches that, let's be honest, we all had with the old way of doing things.
I mean, take a look at this. These were the pain points we all just kind of lived with, right? Class components were so verbose. And don't even get me started on the this keyword. How many hours did we all lose debugging that thing? Then you had this whole maze of lifecycle methods. Component did mount, component did update. You had to split up related logic across all these different places. But you know, the real killer, the absolute biggest headache? Trying to reuse stateful logic. It was a total nightmare. It led us down these rabbit holes of higher order components and render props, which, okay, they worked, but they created this wrapper hell that was just another kind of complexity. Hooks just came in and gave us a clean, direct answer to all of it.
And this quote, this is it. This is the whole philosophy right here. Dan Abramov used this when explaining hooks, and it's perfect. The biggest mistake people make is trying to find the hooks version of component did mount. That's the wrong way to think about it. You're trying to fit a new paradigm into an old box. The key is to completely let go of that lifecycle mindset. To really get good with hooks, you have to unlearn those old patterns and really embrace a fundamentally new way of looking at your components. Okay, so let's see this new way of thinking in action. We're going to dive into our first core hook, useState. And I want you to try and reframe how you think about state. It's not just data. The best way to think about it is as a component's own personal memory. So you might be asking, why can't I just use a regular let or const variable? And that's a great question. It comes down to two big problems. First, those local variables, they just don't survive. They get wiped out between renders. Every time your component function runs again, it's starting from scratch. But the second problem is even more important. Changing a regular variable doesn't tell React to do anything. React has no idea the screen needs to be updated. State is the magic ingredient that solves both of these things. It lets the component remember the data across renders, and it's the trigger that tells React, hey, something changed, time to re-render. So let's break this down. The syntax for useState is beautifully simple, but it's packing a lot of power. You call useState, and you give it an initial value. Here, it's just 0. And what do you get back? You get back an array with two things, always two things. The first thing, count, is the actual value. That's the component's memory for this specific render. The second thing, setCount, is the function you call when you want to change that memory. It's your way of saying, okay, React, update this value and run this whole component function again with the new one. And this flow is just, it's everything. Let's walk through it. First render. The component runs, hits useState 0, and React hands it back 0 setCount. Make sense? Now, the user clicks something and your event handler fires setCount1. This is the magic moment. React doesn't change count right then and there. Instead, it does two things. It schedules a re-render of your component, and it makes a little note to itself that says, next time this component runs, its count should be 1. So when the component re-renders, it hits that exact same useState 0 line again, but this time React knows better. It looks at its notes and says, the new value is 1, and it returns 1 setCount. It remembered. Okay, this right here, this is the core mental model you have to get. Every single render is a snapshot in time. Think of it like a photograph. Within that one render, inside that one function call, props and state are constant. They are fixed. They will not change. So if you have an event handler defined in that render, even if it runs, say, 5 seconds later after an API call, it still sees the world as it was when it was created. It has a closure over the values from that specific render's snapshot. Genuinely, if you can burn this snapshot idea into your brain, so many confusing bugs with state and event handlers will just disappear. All right, Deep breath. Let's talk about the big one, the one that trips up everyone, from junior to senior devs. useEffect. This is where that unlearning thing we talked about becomes absolutely critical. The fundamental purpose of useEffect is to be a bridge. It's for synchronizing your React component with something outside of React. We're talking about the DOM, network requests, timers, third-party libraries, basically anything in the outside world.
So what's the number one mistake? What's the trap we all fall into? It's this question right here. We immediately try to map it to what we know. We think, okay, how do I do component did mount with useEffect? Or how do I do component did update? And that whole line of thinking is a dead end. It will lead to nothing but frustration and bugs. Because useEffect just doesn't work that way. It's built on a totally different mental model.
See, the old model was all about events. It was imperative. We'd say, when this component mounts, run this piece of code. Or, after an update, run this other code. It was a timeline of events. The new model, the useEffect model, is about synchronization. It's declarative. You're not telling React when to do something. You're telling React what the end result should be. You're saying, hey, React, based on these current props and this current state, the outside world needs to be in sync. The document title should be this. The chat connection should be open. React's job is then to make it so. Your effect connects, it keeps things synced up, and then the cleanup function you return, that disconnects.
I love this way of putting it. It's all about the destination, not the journey. It nails the useEffect mindset. You're not writing a step-by-step instruction manual. You're just describing the final picture. You're saying, this is what I want the world to look like. It doesn't matter if it's the very first render or the 50th. The job of the effect is the same. Make sure the external world matches the current state of my component. So how do we tell React when it needs to rerun this synchronization logic? That's what the dependency array is for. It's our contract with React. We're telling it, hey, this effect, this whole synchronization thing, it only depends on these values right here in this array. If none of them have changed since the last render, don't bother rerunning the effect. You can just skip it, because I guarantee you nothing is out of sync. It's a performance optimization, but it's a critical one. Which brings us to probably the single most important rule of useEffect. And trust me, this is the source of like 90% of all useEffect bugs you'll ever encounter. Do not lie to React about dependencies. It's that simple. If your effect's code reads a value from props or state, that value has to be in the dependency array. End of story. The classic mistake is leaving something out because you think, oh, I only want this to run on mount. That is a trap. It's a recipe for stale data, stale closures, and the kind of bugs that will have you pulling your hair out for hours. And here's the classic example of that lie in action. You've probably written this bug yourself. I know I have. We want a simple timer that ticks up every second, so we set up an interval inside a useEffect. And we give it an empty dependency array, empty brackets, because our brain says, well, I only want to start the timer once when it mounts. But look inside the interval. We're calling setCount count plus 1. We're using the count variable. Because our effect only ever ran on the initial render, it captured the value of count from that first snapshot. And what was that value? It was 0. So every single second, forever, our code is just calling setCount 0 plus 1. The count gets set to 1, and then it just stays there. We lied, and our timer is broken.
So how do you fix this? Well, your first instinct might be to add count to the dependency array. But if you do that, the effect will rerun every single time count changes, meaning you'll be clearing and setting a new interval every second. That's not what we want. The real fix, the elegant fix, is to remove the dependency altogether. Instead of reading count from our component scope, we use the functional update form of setCount. We pass it a function, setCount c plus 1. What this does is it tells React, hey, I don't care what the current count is, just take whatever it is and add 1 to it. Now our effect code doesn't depend on the count variable anymore. Our empty dependency array is now honest, and our code works perfectly.
Okay, so we've seen how useState and useEffect work, but how does React actually pull this off? It can feel a bit like magic, but it's not. It's all built on a foundation of 2 very simple but incredibly strict rules. And here they are, the 2 commandments of hooks. Rule number 1, you can only call hooks at the top level. No loops, no if statements, no nested functions. Every single time your component renders, the hooks have to be called in the same order. Rule number 2, you can only call hooks from a React function component or from another custom hook. That's it. You can't call them from a regular JavaScript function. So, why? Why so strict? Well, it's because of how React keeps track of state behind the scenes. It's actually surprisingly simple. For each component, React maintains an array of state slots. The first time your component renders, when you call useState, that gets the first slot in the array. Your second hook call gets the second slot, and so on. On the next render, React relies on you calling those hooks in the exact same order so it can hand you back the state from the correct slot. See? If you put a useState inside an if statement, sometimes it would be the third hook called, and sometimes it wouldn't be called at all. The order would be broken, and React would have no idea which state belongs to which hook call. The rules exist to make sure that call order is always predictable and stable.
Okay, we have covered a ton of ground here, so let's take a second to just pull it all back together. Let's really hammer home these new mental models, because getting this stuff right is what separates a good React dev from a great one. This is the new way of thinking in React.
So, what are the big takeaways? First, remember the shift to hooks wasn't just for fun. It was a deliberate move to solve real problems with classes, giving us cleaner code and, most importantly, a way to share stateful logic. Second, for useState, that snapshot model is everything. Props and state are frozen in time for each render. Third, for useEffect, just try to forget the words mount, update, and unmount. Erase them. Think synchronization, always. And finally, those two rules of hooks, they're not guidelines. They are the law. They are what makes this whole beautiful declarative system possible.
And you know, that really brings us full circle. The true magic of hooks, the real power, gets unlocked when you start building your own custom hooks. When you start seeing repeated stateful logic in your app and you think, hey, I can pull that out. So I'll leave you with a little homework. Take a look at the apps you're working on right now. Where do you see that repetitive logic? Is it in how you fetch data, how you handle form state, maybe how you connect to a WebSocket? What could you extract into your own clean, reusable custom hook? That's where the next level is. Thanks for listening.